What began as a simmering struggle for control has now escalated into a high-stakes showdown that could upend the state's leadership. The State House of Assembly, led by Speaker Martins Amewule, initiated fresh development proceedings against Governor Simi Fubara and his deputy, Professor Ngozi Odu. Joining us on this show to discuss this latest move by the State Assembly are Rice News analysts Dr. Sam Amadi and Frank Tietie. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Ruben Awete.
Good morning. Well, good to have both of you in the house. Very quickly, before now, we've been discussing the plan to remove Governor Fubara and his deputy from office the third time. And then we've been talking about the drama, the melodrama, as it were, or the tragic melodrama, if you like, in Rivers State. We'd just like both of you to comment your take on this development story in Rivers State. Very familiar. 1 week, one trouble, 1 day, one trouble in Rivers State. Let me start with you, Dr. Amadi, and thereafter I would like to have your input, Frank Tietie. Happy New Year to both of you.
Thank you so much for having me. And, well, like they say, this is now becoming a classical drama, although it has very serious implications for both governance and state stability. But the background is simple. Politics and its disappointments easily feed into judicial and quasi-judicial procedure, and that's what impeachment, is. The constitutional premise is that the House of Assembly or National Assembly could impeach a president or governor on what they call gross misconduct. Now, there's plethora of cases in Nigeria that has tried to explain the procedure, and what comes out is that strict compliance with the process. But beyond the legality of the procedure, the fact that this is like a nuclear option when political differences become insolvable, or when political actors themselves are no longer going to tolerate the other person, or when the stakes, like Wike says, if this guy gets second time, I'm dead. So when political actors face political high-cost political acts that could threats, they resort to a nuclear option. So we've seen that not many of these have succeeded, underscoring that their basis, that little good faith often in the triggering of impeachment. So in Rivers State, it's very clear that this is continuing frustration around the way the governor has been going on in terms of perhaps not keeping to deals. But it doesn't look like that nothing has happened extraordinarily in terms of the process of governance that warrants this higher level of frustration and anger that's now leading to very precipitate action. So the question that is that this is all about what's going to happen in 2027 and what's going to follow after that. If now that the governor has moved to APC to provide himself some kind of protection, then the other combatants in this political big battle reckons that something drastic has to happen to stop him. If he doesn't get this, if he gets past this stage, then they are all going to be politically damaged. So this is politics, but the constitution seems to be preempted that we're going to get into this crisis, and there are provided steps that, if followed strictly, would create a balance and be able to, disincentive against reckless political action. So we'll wait to see, but it may not likely succeed. The Constitution has provided security, but the Constitution is realistic that political disappointments will soon enter into proceeding for impeachment and then end up becoming a legal process, in which case courts will sit over and so pretend the exercise of political discretion by political actors.
Your take. Frank Tietie.
All right, I think what we are witnessing in Rivers State is a tale of desperate politicians who seem to have lost their sense of responsibility in terms of delivering governance to the people. They have become so desperate to the point of defecting and counter-defecting become so desperate to the point of, time politics and holding on to political power as if it's akin to their own life. So desperate to the point of demolishing standing structures that is supposed to house the House of Assembly. So this desperation has been the characteristic of politicians when they have differences, especially when godfathers are involved. It shouldn't be so, because we have sufficient directions that have been given by the Supreme Court in many cases that we are familiar with, particularly the case of Kuju and Adeleke, the case of Darie, the case of Baribe, and even Peter Obi. The courts have, given directions as to proper behavior by politicians when they have differences to the extent that they have to wield the big stick. What is important, therefore, is this: this desperation can be referred to as abuse of power, but there must be some presumption that, no matter how we consider the politicians to be a bunch of rascals, they are not. The presumption is that they won elections, they contested, and they represent the people, particularly those in the houses of assembly. I would say, not particularly in Rivers State, particularly a governor. They represent the people. So whatever they do, whether we like it or not, whether it falls below whatever standard that we've set for them, they are exercising proper authority. It should be important to also consider that the issue of impeachment is political, very political, and it is legitimately political, but it is ultimately constitutional, and that makes it legal. And when it is legal, constitutional provisions must be followed. And in this case, from the decisions, the earlier decisions of the Supreme Court, they must be followed mathematically with regards to dates, with regards to timelines, and with regards to composition, and those who do have such authority. There should be no dispute as to whether or not the assembly is operating outside the proper place where it should be, or there is dispute as to who is speaker or who are the members. Now, having said that, we must also now consider that the important part is that, should politicians now consider that when the Constitution referred to gross misconduct, like one funny case we had in the time past where a deputy governor was impeached simply because he was rearing chickens, that makes a mockery of such important power of impeachment. It must be gross misconduct, something that touches on actual constitutional breach. So we must not waste precious governance time, particularly having the Rivers people having suffered seriously as a result of this brickbat between a godfather and a renegade godson, and then an assembly that seems not to have a mind of its own. There must be a call to order that governance is so important. Time is going. Though fortunately, we've seen in the case of Peter Obi that the Supreme Court does watch, that reserving the power to reverse every nonsensical move by an assembly that thinks that it can exercise its power not only politically, but as a result of desperation or to please one particular person. But on the other hand, the governors must realize too that they have a constitutional responsibility to govern according to the book. You see, there must be respect for our constitution. So what we're witnessing in Rivers is another test. It's a normal thing. It's another test, but we would have thought that we have learned our lessons from the case of Rashidi Ladoja, the case of Joshua Darie, the case of Peter Obi, the case of Abaribe, to now know that we don't have to waste precious governance time in trying to remove somebody just because there are political differences, issues of policy, and then we don't have to have boastful godfathers insisting that they own a particular state and as such will make a House of Assembly become so mindless that it does not have a mind of its own and then now has a predictable mind. We cannot also afford the recklessness of executive power in destroying and pulling down structures just because we want to stifle the work of a House of Assembly. A House of Assembly cannot be prevented. Not even the courts can prevent the legislature from carrying its job.
Because of time, I can feel you're impassioned. They're making such incredible points. Because of time, I'd like to step in here. Let me move to Dr. Sam Amadi. Dr. Sam Amadi, from Frank's takes, he's spoken of a number of other instances we've seen in the past, although some might argue that dynamics are different. What do you think are the options that Governor Fubara has? We have seen him successfully exercise appealing to the president, and the president's intervention has saved him twice. Another element we have seen being used, which was what triggered the state of emergency, was the threat of violence. Now, what are the tools available to him to ward off this action that has been taken?
Well, good questions. First is they understand that the constitutional design of liberal democracy is check and balance. That's the critical proposition here. And impeachment procedures are designed to balance power. So you can see the executive has power, the legislature has power, the judiciary has power. So three actors play. Now, the legislature is obviously motivated and mobilized to go after him. He has to, the due notice will give 7 days, he has 14 days to respond, and then there could be appointment of investigators, and then, of course, a vote of yes or no. Now, again, so where the leverage here? First, the first leverage, of course, is political. I mean, Wike and his group continues to say that they pledge to Tinubu. Tinubu is their godfather, but local politics, local politics. So is the president capable of calling back the dogs and say, okay, hands off, game over, and find a solution again that can hold and that appeals to both persons? The problem with this political proposition is that it's like a zero-sum game. You know, Fubara still as governor, and on the ticket, it's disaster for Wike. If they can create win-win, and so that sets the political option. The one that's within Fubara's full control now is the judicial process. Now, the main anchor for this procedure is the appointment by the Chief Justice of the state of those investigators. That is really the anchor point. If you don't get there, you are gone. So what leverage does he have? Of course, he removed the chief judge. Everything has been politics, and I don't blame him. He knows the game against himself. He appointed a chief judge that we think would be more amenable to him. And again, because also the grounds for his impeachment are not legally overwhelming, to say the least. Some would say it's really trash. But, so the judge will be the saving point here, because he will appoint persons who may not, at least by definition constitutionally, people of integrity, who are not politically partisan. So they will look at the lens and say, has this governor, since the end of emergency rule, done anything that amounts to gross misconduct? Even though the Supreme Court has said gross misconduct is in the eye of the beholder. But here, this man of integrity would look at the lens and say, what really is the big deal here? What has this governor done that's suffering 6 months incarceration, if you like, politically, and then coming back, has done anything? So this will be the saving. They will say, we don't think this guy has done anything to warrant. And as the Supreme Court has said in Adeleke's case and many cases, once that verdict is out, dead. So they truncate that impeachment process, although you can restart again several times. So I think the real saving grace will be the judicial side, where he has more leverage and whose definitive proclamation via the investigators who say no guilt. And the law says, as Nikki Toby rightly puts it, it says they don't have two options, just one of two: proven, not proven. If they say not proven, dead. If they say proven, then straight to process of impeachment. So that, I think, is really where we are here, and that's a saving grace for him.
The reason why this crisis has raged on is because of the balance of power. Wike has got FCT, Fubara is the governor. Both of them have power. Best way to settle out this matter, like I've always said, in a worst case scenario, is either you take the power from Fubara or you take the power from Wike, which the president might choose to say doesn't want Wike in his cabinet again, or choosing the Fubara route might be a long one because it also has implications on even the APC themselves. It's going to be an indictment on their party. The question I'm going to ask you today is a very, very difficult one. For the interest of the Rivers people, which Fubara and Wike does not represent, which is about them, who do you think we should take the balance of power from? I'll start with you, Dr. Sam Amadi, then afterwards, Frank Tietie, I'll come to you. For the interest of the Rivers people, which, mind you, Wike or Fubara do not represent. They represent their own selves and their own power hegemony here. So in the interest of the Rivers people, who should we take the balance of power from?
Okay, so good question. And I start first from, I start first from what we're learning from even international law and international politics. Okay, so that's the moral, ethical side of it. And democracy is also idealistic, so we have to start that point. FUBRA, I will amend their thesis slightly to say FUBRA officially represents or should represent the interests of Rivers people because it's their governor. We know that there's agency principal problem in democracy as we have it in corporate governance. So sometimes the agent never, promotes the interests of the principal, the citizens. But, formally is Wike represent the interests of the Tinubu administration. So I think that the balance of power ethically should be shifted towards Fubara, who is the governor of the state. Wike's interest in this matter is political survival. And he made that point. He keeps saying, look, I made a mistake in choosing the governor. You didn't choose the governor. You helped the governor to be a candidate. The people made a choice. If we are still pretending we have a democracy, in fact, that's what I see in this battle, is incoherence. We've seen impeachment is proper in politics, in the US, everywhere. But it's always based on governance misconduct. It's not based on a notion that I brought this boy to represent my interests and this boy is not representing my interests. So the courage and the clarity of thought of Nigerian politicians to openly say, this is my government, this is my state, next time I'll bring somebody who will represent me, is so, brilliantly diabolical and shameful. I mean, how can people openly say, my anger is that I brought A and A is not doing what I want, not what the people want. So there's no argument here ethically that the guy who ought to stand tall is Fubara. He's a guy the people elected and he should be punished for failing to represent them, not punished for failing private pact. But politics is the art of the possible, and sometimes the possible is ridiculous. In that case, the president might take off the balance of power and give to Wike. And it's simple. Who serves me better? Who is central to my 2023, 2027 presidential campaign? What we are saying, Wike is so strong because he has control of states. And I want to talk about the state. The judiciary is a key part of the state. There's this notion about this guy controls everything. And he seems to be getting results. And it's a telling commentary on how the Nigerian institution has collapsed and fallen. That we can openly identify somebody as the lord of the manor, whose position is relatively insignificant. I mean, in political governance, the Minister of FCT is relatively insignificant because the Minister of FCT is an agent. It's actually a SA to the president. The president, the chief executive of FCTA because of if you look at the Federal Capital Territory Act, and he just donates that power to a minister. And that minister, so Wike has earned the right to be seen as too powerful. So in my view, ethically, Fubara is the guy who should have the power. But de facto in politics, the guy who has the power is the guy who serves the president's political interests.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Frank Tietie?
See, I think that it is morally, politically, and legally wrong for us to give any place to the president in this matter. In fact, the president appears to be doing more harm in the Rivers issue than good. We must come to a point where we allow our institutions to run smoothly and allow our laws to be tested and our constitutional norms to be established. So it should have nothing to do with President Tinubu. So the era where they say it was federal might that they used to remove Ngige as governor, as to be arrested and then forced to resign. The era where they say the then president don't want Rashidi Ladoja, or he wants an impeachment immediately against Alame Sega or Joshua Dari and the rest of them. All of those things are contrary and inimical to the principle of federalism. So we must establish, and we should advise our president very strongly to wash off his hands from what's going on in Rivers State. Now, in that case, let us also understand, and I think this is important. I'll stop this unnecessary vilification of the figures here. Let them play their politics, let them govern. However, if they must exercise power, and I refer to the powers under Section 188 of the Constitution by the members of the House of Assembly, they should exercise such political power according to law. If they fail, they must realize that even though the courts cannot stop the exercise of legislative powers, however, the court has the powers to stop any form of unconstitutional and abusive use of such political power. So we're watching them. If they fail to comply with the rules or with the provisions of the Constitution, then they can be checked. However, I think it is not proper to constantly subject what's going on, Rivers politics, to this kind of national assessment simply because of a divisive political figure like Nyesom Wike. However, we should also not spread the blame to all of them. How can they have a House of Assembly that does not seem to exercise its independence? Why? It's a breach of trust. It's a failure on the part of those men who represent the various tribes, the various local governments in Rivers State. They should be ashamed that they cannot appear to the Nigerian people that whatever they are doing is based on their own reasoning, or is based on their own volition, or based on the interest of the Rivers people. But to think that somehow they are desperate, or they are being tied to the strings of one particular political figure is a big shame. It's a dent on our democracy. It's something that we must stop. So the president should wash off his hands. Let us be a country that grows on precedent. We need to test our democracy, and this Rivers case should be allowed on. If these men think that there is gross misconduct indeed, allow them to go on. And again, don't forget, because the respected Professor Amadi here has said that the chief judge has the capacity to save for Governor Fubara. That is not this point. That cannot be possibly correct altogether. The reason is that the seven men men or women that he will appoint must not be members of a political party, must not be public servants, whether serving or retired, but must be ordinary men, but simply be men of integrity. He is quite correct. These men, whatever they say, ultimately will determine the fate of
Mr. Tietie, would you respect if you can hear me?
To have his cause in Rivers State, and let us be watching. And let us have there's some independence.
Can you hear me?
Should operate as a federating part of Nigeria, and not an appendage of the APC president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Mr. Tietie, you didn't answer the question. You pivoted. I get it. You don't want to take any sides, but the question was clear. Who do you want the balance of power to tilt to? But it's fine. You have a right to do that. It's fine. You have a right to pivot. Thank you. I can appreciate you. Yeah.
Do appreciate that he did make a strong case for separation of powers in this.